Ghost planes may sound like a paranormal phenomenon. However, they are very real and are extremely dangerous. These planes essentially become flying missiles. Today, we are going to examine some infamous instances of ghost plane phenomena and why it happens. This is Everything Has History. A ghost plane can be defined as an aircraft that seemingly flies on its own without any crew or passengers. Additionally, a ghost plane can be an aircraft that is spotted or thought to be lost and forgotten, as we will see in our first story. World War II produced several of these ghost planes. One of the most famous is a B-17 crash in Greenland. The plane was called My Gal Sal. My Gal Sal was a B-17 bomber, part of the 342nd Bomb Squadron, flying as part of a military supply buildup in the UK before World War II. The plane was forced to make an emergency landing due to weather. During the landing, the plane impacted heavily into the ice and the snow, damaging the propellers. Due to this, the propellers were unable to turn, cutting off all power to the airplane itself. The crew was forced to cut off the tips of the propellers so that the engines would turn and produce power to make emergency radio calls. After 9 days of camping inside the B-17, the crew abandoned it in the ice and was told to hike over 20 miles to a rescue area. The plane was forgotten and covered in snow for the next 22 years. During a flyover of Greenland in 1964, the Air Force spotted the forgotten airplane buried in the glaciers. It was forgotten once again until 31 years after that, in 1995, when an expedition was sent to rescue and remove My Gal Sal from its icy tomb. The tail section of the plane had been detached from the rest of the fuselage. However, most of the plane was roughly intact, causing little restoration work to be done in Cincinnati, where it was restored to a static display. Currently, you can see My Gal Sal at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. Our next story is of the Phantom Flying Fortress, another B-17, which actually landed itself at an RAF base in England after a bombing raid into Europe. This was obviously a completely normal occurrence. As the airplane landed and completed all of its normal landing procedures, the landing crew waited for the pilots to exit the plane, but they never did. After 10 minutes, the landing crew decided to enter the airplane, and upon inspection, the pilot's logbook was discovered, and the last entry read, quote, "bad flak," meaning anti-aircraft ordnance. Also, it was perplexing that there were 12 intact parachutes inside the plane. The serial number was sent over to the Americans and they checked it out. Apparently, the plane had run into trouble over Belgium and was unable to use its weapons as the weapon system malfunctioned. Additionally, the engine malfunctioned at the same time. The pilot set the plane to autopilot to give the crew a chance to jump out and maintain altitude. Then, inexplicably, the plane engines righted themselves and the plane continued on its autopilot course towards its base in England. Unfortunately, nothing is known of the crew that had to jump out of the B-17, but the plane, however, landed by itself on a runway in England. One of the most fascinating cases of ghost plane phenomena. Kind of piggybacking off this, one of the pervasive kind of paranormal aspects of ghost planes is the existence of gremlins. Especially in World War II, American and British pilots felt that little green or red or different colored gremlins were living inside the airplanes causing mischief. And this type of scenario would definitely play into the gremlin mythology as well. Moving along to another World War II plane, we have the Lady Be Good, a B-24 that was lost on its first mission in 1943 following an attack on Naples, Italy. The plane rested in the Libyan desert for 15 years, holding its macabre secret. When it was discovered by an oil exploration team, they discovered no human remains and marked its location. The following year, the plane was explored once more. In the plane, they discovered water, coffee, and machine guns that were still operational, as well as radios. One of the last messages of the co-pilot's diary reads, quote, "Still waiting for help, still praying." In this more extensive exploration of the site, 8 of the 9 crew members' remains were discovered in varying distances from the plane crash. According to the diary referenced, it is believed that the crew survived for close to 8 days in the Libyan desert. This was another tragic case of a World War II bomber and its pilots and crew, and another forgotten ghost plane from the World War II era. Moving along to more modern times, this is a MiG-23, one of Russia's most famous fighter planes of the era. On July 4th, 1989, shortly after takeoff during a training mission, a MiG-23's afterburner failed, causing a potential dangerous situation for the pilot. The MiG-23 was the Soviets' response to the F-15 and was not generally known to be hard to operate. However, they experienced several key issues and mechanical failures. Mostly, the engines tended to overheat and the fuel system suffered from several design failures. Realizing his plane was likely going to crash, the pilot ejected. However, the plane stayed on course and kept flying. This being during the Cold War, it was unknown what was happening with this rogue MiG flying across Europe, causing everyone to be on high alert. As the plane passed into Germany, worry began to get higher and higher. Germany and Berlin were already hot locations of the Cold War. The Air Force scrambled F-15s to intercept the plane. Upon interception, no one had been able to contact the Soviets or the pilot. This situation was quickly becoming a potential international incident. As the plane continued flying into French airspace, France scrambled its planes as well. When the plane was intercepted, it was discovered the cockpit had been ejected and the plane was flying on autopilot. The planes followed the MiG until it flew into Belgian airspace. Not knowing the contingencies for shooting down an unmanned plane, especially a Soviet MiG during the Cold War. By this time, the plane had flown over 600 miles just on autopilot alone. Without notice, the plane began to dip and drop out of the sky as the plane ran out of fuel. Tragically, it crashed into a house in Belgium, killing 1 occupant inside. Moving along to a more recent event that involves a civilian aircraft, Helios 522. Helios 522 was flying from Cyprus to Prague with a stopover in Athens. 20 minutes into the flight, all communication with the plane was lost. Approximately 40 minutes into the flight, the plane entered Athens airspace and began circling the Athens airport. At this point, radio contact was not established and fighter jets were scrambled to intercept the wayward aircraft. At this point, some believe the plane could have been hijacked. As the pilots of the F-15s observed the plane, they saw no movement in the cockpit, and passengers and crew slumped over seats in the passenger compartment. They continued to shadow the plane while trying to consider contingency plans. All of a sudden, a flight attendant named Andreas Prodromo and his girlfriend Harris Charalambous were observed in the cockpit at the controls attempting to get control of the 737. Within minutes of observing the two in the cockpit, the left engine flamed out due to fuel exhaustion. Andreas was able to bank the plane out of its holding pattern and towards the hills surrounding the town of Grammatico. The plane crashed, killing all on board. Without the actions of Prodromo and Charalambous, ground casualties in Athens could have been catastrophic. The investigation concluded the airplane suffered a depressurization event shortly after takeoff. The plane had a manual switch to pressurize the aircraft. There was no warning system that notified the pilots that manual pressurization was needed. After the incident, the FAA made sure that all American airplanes had warning systems installed that alerted pilots that the plane was not pressurized before takeoff. And without, again, the actions of Andreas Prodromo and Harris Charlumbus, ground casualties could have been extreme. Their heroic actions saved many lives that day. The ghost plane phenomena is one of the most interesting niches of aviation history. There are multiple more stories to explore within this realm. Thanks again for watching this episode of Everything Has History, and I will see you in the next one.